In the frozen wilderness of Montana, a lonely veteran stopped his truck when he heard a faint cry in the storm, and what he found buried in the snow would change his life forever. A newborn left to die. A silver bracelet engraved with one name, and a mystery that would lead him straight into the heart of a billionaire's secret. 5 years later, when the truth finally comes to light, Ethan must choose between blood and love, between giving up the boy he raised or protecting the only family God ever gave him. With his loyal German shepherd by his side, he learns that miracles don't always come from heaven's thunder sometimes. They come from a storm-torn night and a heart willing to love. If you believe God still works through ordinary people, don't scroll away. Hit subscribe, share, and comment Amen to spread this story of faith, love, and divine purpose. May the Lord bless and protect everyone watching. The storm had started before sunset, sweeping across the vast wilderness of Montana with a merciless chill. Snow fell thick and unrelenting, blanketing the pines and winding roads in a curtain of white. The night sky was a blur of icy wind and swirling flakes, the kind that could silence an entire forest. Along a desolate highway, the headlights of a dusty old pickup truck cut through the darkness like twin daggers. Behind the wheel sat Ethan Cole, a 37-year-old former Army Ranger who had long since traded battlefields for solitude. Ethan's face was rugged and angular, with a short, weather-beaten beard peppered with gray. Deep lines ran along his forehead and around his eyes that once burned with command, but now carried the quiet heaviness of a man who had seen too much. Years of war had left their mark not only on his body, but on his soul. He had lost friends, purpose, and eventually his place in the world. Since leaving the military, Ethan had withdrawn into the mountains, making a modest life repairing cabins and tending to his small property near Glacier National Park. Beside him sat Rex, his 5-year-old German shepherd, a large, muscular dog with a jet-black coat and amber eyes that gleamed with intelligence. Rex had served with Ethan during his final deployment, trained in search and rescue. When Ethan retired, he couldn't leave his partner behind. The two had been inseparable ever since, a man and a dog who understood silence better than words. Rex was disciplined, alert, and loyal to the core, but with Ethan he was calm, gentle, even protective in a way that felt almost human. As the truck climbed the icy mountain road, the wind howled like a living thing. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel, scanning the dim path ahead. The heater groaned weakly against the cold, and frost had started to form on the inside of the windshield. Suddenly, Rex lifted his head, ears perked, body stiffening. He let out a low growl followed by sharp, frantic barking. "What is it, boy?" Ethan muttered, pulling the truck to the side of the road. The noise of the engine died, leaving only the howling wind. For a moment, he heard nothing. Then, faintly, beneath the storm's roar, came a sound that didn't belong to the wilderness. A cry. High-pitched, fragile, and desperate. A baby's cry. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the blizzard, snow whipping against his coat. Rex bounded ahead, nose to the ground, following the sound with uncanny precision. After several yards, the beam of Ethan's light caught something, a small bundle lying beside a fallen tree. The blanket was soaked through with snow, and inside it, a newborn infant, its tiny face red from the cold, its cries weak and fading. Ethan froze for a second, disbelief tightening his chest. Who would leave a baby out here, in a storm like this? "Easy now," he murmured, kneeling down. The infant's fingers, no bigger than matchsticks, curled helplessly in the freezing air. Ethan scooped the baby up carefully, wrapping it inside his thick jacket. The warmth of his body made the crying soften, then fade into quiet whimpers. Rex stood beside him, whining softly, his breath forming clouds in the freezing night. The dog leaned close and gently licked the baby's tiny hand, as if to reassure it that it wasn't alone. Ethan looked around. No headlights, no footprints besides his own, only faint tire tracks already being swallowed by the snow. Whoever had left the baby had done so recently, and had fled in a hurry. He hesitated for a moment, torn between searching for whoever abandoned the child and protecting the fragile life now in his arms. The storm made the decision for him. The wind grew stronger, visibility dropping to mere feet. He turned back toward the truck, clutching the baby close to his chest. Back inside the cab, Ethan started the heater full blast. Rex pressed close to the seat, his amber eyes fixed on the bundle. The baby's face was pale but peaceful now, wrapped tightly in Ethan's coat. "You're lucky, little one," Ethan whispered. "Another hour out there and you'd be gone." He drove through the storm in silence, his thoughts spinning. He had found lost hikers, trapped animals, even wounded soldiers, but never something like this, a baby, out in the middle of nowhere. When he reached his cabin, a small wooden home tucked between tall pines, Ethan carried the baby inside. The fire he had left burning earlier was nearly out. He threw on more logs until the flames roared back to life. Rex shook off the snow and circled near the hearth, before lying down, eyes alert. Ethan found an old wooden box and lined it with blankets, setting it near the fire as a makeshift cradle. He checked the baby over. Healthy, no visible injuries, maybe 3 or 4 days old. Around its tiny wrist hung a silver bracelet engraved with a single word, Noah. Ethan stared at the name for a long moment. It felt strange, like fate was whispering. "Noah," he said quietly, testing the name aloud. The baby shifted slightly, as if responding. He smiled faintly, a rare expression on his weathered face. "Guess that's you, then." As the night deepened, the storm outside raged harder, beating against the windows. Ethan sat by the fire, holding the baby against his chest, wrapped in a soft towel. Rex rested his head on Ethan's leg, eyes flicking between his master and the child. Ethan thought about the world beyond these mountains. Cold, chaotic, cruel. Maybe that was why someone had abandoned the baby. Maybe desperation. Maybe fear. Whatever the reason, the thought filled him with quiet anger. No child deserved that. Hours passed before the storm began to ease. The fire crackled warmly, painting the cabin walls in shades of orange and gold. The baby slept soundly now, tiny breaths rising and falling. Ethan looked down at him, a strange feeling stirring inside, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. For so long, his life had been about survival, not purpose. But this was different. He gently laid Noah in the box beside the fire. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I'll figure the rest out tomorrow." He turned down the lamp, letting the flickering light of the fire fill the room. Outside, the wind softened, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt a quiet peace settling over him. As he crawled into bed, Rex padded closer to the box and curled up beside it, keeping silent watch. The baby stirred, letting out a tiny sigh, and Rex's ears twitched at the sound. Ethan watched the two of them from his bed, a soldier scarred by war, a dog forged by loyalty, and a newborn child who had somehow found them in the middle of nowhere. The last thing Ethan thought before drifting into sleep was that maybe, just maybe, this storm hadn't brought misfortune after all. Perhaps it had delivered a miracle. 5 years had passed since that night, when the storm had carried a newborn into Ethan Cole's arms. The winters in Montana were still harsh, the mountains still cold and unforgiving. But for Ethan, life had taken on a quiet rhythm that soothed his once restless soul. His cabin, once filled only with the sound of creaking wood and the crackle of fire, now echoed with laughter. The light, innocent laughter of a boy named Noah. Noah was now 5 years old, with a mop of soft blonde hair that caught the sunlight like gold dust, and eyes the color of the morning sky. He had a curious mind, forever asking questions about birds, trees, and stars. Ethan often watched him playing outside with Rex, the loyal German shepherd who had aged gracefully, his once jet-black coat now streaked with silver along the muzzle. Though Rex's movements had slowed a little, his spirit remained fierce, protective, and patient, especially with the child he had guarded since infancy. Ethan had built a stable life in the wilderness. He worked as a carpenter, taking small repair jobs from nearby towns, his craftsmanship admired for its precision. The neighbors, ranchers, loggers, and old-timers respected him. They saw a quiet man with tired eyes but a kind heart, always willing to lend a hand, never asking for more than solitude in return. He never spoke of his past in the army or the baby he'd found that winter night. To them, Noah was simply his son, a gift of fate, and no one dared to question it. Noah had grown strong and clever. He spent his days exploring the woods, collecting rocks and wildflowers, or sitting beside Ethan in the workshop, fascinated by the way wood could turn into furniture beneath his father's hands. Every night before bed, Ethan told him stories about courage, loyalty, and the bond between man and dog. Sometimes he caught himself glancing at the silver bracelet that still hung around Noah's wrist, the one engraved with his name. He had thought about searching for the boy's origins many times, but something always stopped him. Perhaps fear, perhaps love. In the mountains, Noah was safe. Meanwhile, far away in New York City, a very different kind of silence weighed upon Robert Harlow. At 52, Robert was a man whose presence commanded every room he entered. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair always neatly combed and sharp blue eyes that once sparkled with ambition, but now carried the weariness of grief. He was the CEO of Harlow Industries, one of the largest real estate empires in the country. But despite his success, he lived alone in a mansion too large for one man. His wife, Evelyn, had left him years ago after the tragedy, the death of one of their newborn twins. Robert had never believed his son was truly dead. Something about that night had never felt right. Doctors had said one twin was stillborn, but the body had been cremated before Robert could see it. He had tried to move on, burying his doubts under years of work, but time had only deepened the wound. He had grown distant, cold even, his empire thriving while his heart withered. It was only when Mrs. Whitmore, his longtime housekeeper, now frail and bedridden at the city hospital, sent for him that the past came roaring back. She had served his family for over 20 years, a small woman with thin gray hair and trembling hands. Her voice was weak when Robert arrived at her bedside. "Sir, I must tell you before I go," she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "The baby, your baby, he wasn't dead. He was taken." Robert froze, disbelief etched across his face. "What do you mean, taken?" She confessed that Helen Briggs, a young maid employed in the Harlow household years ago, had lost her own newborn the same night Evelyn gave birth. Overcome with envy and despair, Helen switched the babies before fleeing the city. Mrs. Whitmore had kept the secret out of fear and guilt. But now dying, she could no longer bear it. For the first time in years, Robert felt something he hadn't felt since that night. Hope mixed with rage. "Where did she go?" he demanded, but Mrs. Whitmore only shook her head. "Somewhere far," she said weakly. "I heard she went west." Moments later, she passed away, leaving Robert standing beside her bed, fists trembling. That evening, in his office overlooking Manhattan's skyline, Robert stared at the family photo on his desk. Evelyn himself and their surviving son, Caleb, now studying abroad. But in his heart, he knew his family was incomplete. He needed answers. That was when he picked up the phone and called a name he hadn't spoken in years. Sarah Collins answered on the third ring. She was 40, tall and athletic, with auburn hair tied neatly behind her shoulders, pale, freckled skin, and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Once a respected FBI agent, she had left the bureau after her partner was killed during a kidnapping rescue gone wrong. The guilt had driven her to private investigation work. Smaller cases, fewer risks. But Robert Harlow's voice brought her back to the world she thought she had left. "I need to find someone," he said simply. "Someone who should never have been lost." Sarah arrived at his office the next morning, wearing a gray coat and black gloves, her expression composed but curious. Robert handed her the silver birth bracelet of his missing son, identical to the one that would soon draw her toward Montana. "I'll find him," she said firmly, her voice low but confident. "No matter where he is." Outside, snow had begun to fall again over New York, soft and silent. It was the same kind of snow that had covered Montana 5 years ago. The night a storm carried a baby to safety. The small mountain town of Cedar Creek was just waking to the soft glow of spring. Snow still clung stubbornly to the peaks above, but the valley had begun to thaw, streams whispering again beneath melting ice. For Ethan Cole, life followed its quiet rhythm. Mornings filled with work in his carpentry shed, afternoons spent teaching Noah how to carve small wooden animals, evenings walking along the ridge with Rex trotting faithfully ahead. Yet fate has a way of stirring the calm just when one begins to believe peace is permanent. That morning, while chasing Rex near the barn, Noah tripped on a loose plank and fell, scraping his knee on a rusty nail. The boy's cry of pain sent Ethan running. The wound was deep, bleeding more than a child should. Ethan wrapped it in cloth and drove through winding forest roads to Cedar Creek Medical Center, a modest hospital run by a handful of doctors and nurses who knew every face in town. Inside, Dr. Melanie Parker, a middle-aged woman with short, gray-streaked hair and kind eyes behind her glasses, examined the wound. She was practical and calm, the kind of person whose voice made fear retreat. "He'll need a few stitches," she said softly, glancing at Ethan with understanding. As she worked, she noticed the silver bracelet on Noah's wrist. "That's a lovely keepsake," she murmured. Ethan only nodded. When the procedure was done, Dr. Parker smiled. "He'll be fine, but since we don't have his file on record, I'll add a small blood test to check for tetanus risk." Ethan agreed without hesitation. It seemed routine. 2 days later, the call came. Dr. Parker sounded confused but excited. "Ethan, could you stop by the clinic? There's something unusual about Noah's blood work." Ethan's stomach tightened. When he arrived, she handed him the report. "It's not bad news," she said quickly. "Just rare. Noah's blood type is AB negative, one of the rarest in the world. What's stranger is, when we ran it through the national database, it flagged a potential match in the Harlow Foundation's Pediatric Genetics Registry. That's not something we normally see for local kids." Ethan frowned. "What kind of registry?" Dr. Parker hesitated. It's used mostly by hospitals for elite private donors or families who've banked cord blood for medical use. The match suggests Noah might be linked to someone registered years ago. Ethan left the clinic unsettled. That night, as he sat by the fire, Noah slept soundly on the couch. His leg bandaged, Rex curled beside him. The flickering light cast shadows across the room. Ethan turned the silver bracelet over in his hands. The engraved letters, Noah, caught the glow. Something about it gnawed at him now. 1,000 miles away, in New York, Sarah Collins sat at her desk, surrounded by case files and photographs. The Harlow case had become her obsession these past few weeks. She'd tracked down the death certificate of Helen Briggs, died in a car accident 3 years ago in Wyoming, and had located the orphaned boy she'd left behind. But that boy's DNA didn't match the Harlow line. Sarah had almost lost hope until the system pinged with a new entry. A small-town hospital in Montana had uploaded a blood sample from a 5-year-old boy named Noah. The match was near perfect. Sarah's pulse quickened. She printed the report and leaned back in her chair, her sharp green eyes narrowing with focus. Her auburn hair fell loose around her face as she whispered, "Montana." It made sense. The kind of remote place someone might hide or simply disappear. 2 days later, Sarah's rental SUV rumbled up the mountain road to Cedar Creek. She wore a dark wool coat and jeans tucked into hiking boots, her stride brisk even in the biting wind. The locals turned to watch her pass. She didn't look like she belonged here. At the general store, she asked about Ethan Cole. The shopkeeper, an old man with a beard like frost, gave her a wary glance. "Ethan. Keeps to himself. Lives near Miller Ridge with his boy and that big black dog. Good man. Don't bring trouble his way." When she finally reached the cabin, smoke rose from the chimney, and Rex barked from the porch, hackles raised. Ethan stepped out, wiping sawdust from his hands, his expression cautious. Sarah raised her palms slowly. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said, her voice calm but firm. "My name is Sarah Collins. I'm an investigator from New York." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What's this about?" "It's about your son." The words hit like a hammer. Sarah explained the case. The Harlow twins, the missing child, the matching DNA sequence. She handed him the report. Ethan didn't speak for a long time. His eyes flicked between her face and the papers, then toward the window where Noah was feeding Rex bits of bread. "That boy has been my whole world for 5 years," Ethan said quietly. "Whatever story you're chasing, it won't change that." Sarah's tone softened. "I'm not here to take him away. I just want to find the truth. If what I believe is right, that child is the son of Robert Harlow, a man who's been searching for him since the day he disappeared." Ethan's gaze fell to the bracelet again. He thought of the night he'd found Noah in the snow, the mysterious tire tracks, the unanswered question of why. Maybe this was the answer he'd never wanted to find. Rex whined softly, sensing the tension. Sarah crouched, holding out her hand. Rex sniffed it, tail wagging once before settling back beside Ethan. It was as if the dog had given silent permission. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low. "If this is true, we'll need proof. I won't risk him being hurt again." Sarah nodded. "That's all I ask." As night fell over the valley, the three of them stood in the fading light. The soldier who had found a child, the agent who had found a clue, and the dog who had kept them both safe. None of them yet realized that what they'd uncovered was only the beginning. The air in Montana that evening was unusually still, the kind of quiet that presses on the skin before a storm. The last light of day faded over the jagged pines, and the distant hum of crickets filled the forest around Ethan Cole's cabin. Inside, the fire glowed low, casting a golden warmth on the wooden walls. Ethan, his arm still sore from a day's work, sat at the kitchen table studying the DNA documents Sarah had brought. Across from him, Sarah Collins typed notes on her laptop, the pale blue light flickering across her freckled face. Noah had fallen asleep on the couch. Rex curled protectively at his feet. Sarah broke the silence first. "We'll need to leave early tomorrow," she said softly. "I've arranged for a private lab in New York to run a confirmation test. It's the only way to prove Noah's identity without alerting the press." Ethan looked up, his dark eyes steady but troubled. "And what happens when we have the results?" Sarah hesitated, then replied, "That depends on what Robert Harlow chooses to do." She didn't say it, but Ethan could read between the lines. The life he'd built might be taken from him as easily as it began. Outside, the moon rose, silver and full, spilling light across the snow-dusted clearing. In the darkness beyond the trees, a figure moved silently. Mark Weller, a man in his early 40s, tall and lean, with a weathered face hardened by years of labor and guilt. His eyes were pale gray, his beard patchy, and a deep scar ran from his temple to his jawline. Once he had been a chauffeur in the Harlow estate, a quiet man easily overlooked, but beneath that calm exterior had always been resentment. He had helped Helen Briggs all those years ago, smuggling the newborn out of New York for money and a promise that she never kept. Now, hearing whispers that someone was digging into the past, Mark had come to bury the truth for good. He crouched behind the trees, watching the cabin. Inside, the light dimmed. He waited until the fire flickered out, then began his approach, boots sinking silently into the damp earth. Rex's ears twitched first. The dog lifted his head from the rug, nostrils flaring, muscles tightening beneath his thick coat. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Ethan, half dozing in a chair, instantly straightened. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Rex rose, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the back window. Then came the sound, the faint creak of a floorboard on the porch. Before Ethan could move, the window shattered inward with a crash. A shadow burst through the glass, landing hard on the floorboards. Rex lunged, barking ferociously, teeth bared. Mark swung a heavy flashlight like a weapon, catching Rex on the shoulder, but the dog only snarled louder, clamping down on the intruder's arm. "Get off!" Mark shouted, panic breaking his composure. Ethan grabbed the shotgun mounted by the door, but hesitated to fire in such close quarters. Sarah moved faster than he expected. Drawing her pistol, a remnant of her FBI days, she aimed squarely at Mark. "Don't move!" she barked, her voice sharp and commanding. For a moment the scene froze. The ex-soldier, the ex-agent, the criminal, and the dog locked in a storm of breath and fear. Mark swung a desperate punch, catching Ethan across the cheek before shoving Sarah aside and bolting through the door. Ethan cursed, grabbing a flashlight and following him into the woods. The night swallowed them instantly, branches snapping underfoot, the beam of light bouncing wildly through the trees. Sarah followed close behind, Rex racing ahead, his barks echoing through the forest. The chase tore through the darkness, the glint of moonlight on snow, the sharp scent of pine and sweat. Mark's breath came ragged as he stumbled over roots. Ethan caught up near a clearing, tackling him to the ground. They struggled, fists and elbows striking in the mud. "You don't know what you're getting into," Mark hissed. "You think this is just about a stolen baby? You're wrong. There are people who'll kill to keep this buried. Rex lunged again, pinning Mark's leg as Sarah arrived, weapon drawn. She pressed the barrel to his shoulder. "You're done running," she said coldly. "Who are you working for?" Mark spat blood into the dirt. "Ask Robert Harlow's wife," he sneered. "She wanted her real son to inherit, not the one she despised. She planned it all. We just did the dirty work." Ethan's stomach twisted. "You're saying Evelyn Harlow ordered this?" Mark's grin was bitter. "Rich people don't get their hands dirty. They pay people like me to do it." Sarah cuffed him swiftly, her face unreadable. The adrenaline ebbed as police sirens wailed faintly in the distance. She had called them before the chase began. When they escorted Mark away, his last words echoed through the trees. "You can't save him. They'll come for the boy." Back at the cabin, Ethan sat beside Noah's bed, staring at the sleeping child's peaceful face. The fire had burned low again, shadows dancing softly across the walls. Sarah stood in the doorway, holstering her weapon. "You should get some rest," she said quietly. Ethan didn't answer. His cheek was bruised, his knuckles scraped, but none of that mattered. All he could think about was what Mark had said, that this wasn't over, that there were more secrets hiding behind the Harlow name. Rex settled at his feet, letting out a low sigh, his golden eyes reflecting the glow of the embers. Ethan reached down, resting a hand on the dog's head. "We'll protect him," he murmured, "no matter what comes." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. The same as it had 5 years ago when destiny first crossed their path. Dawn broke over the mountains of Montana like a quiet confession. The snow that had fallen overnight shimmered in the pale morning light, each flake a fragment of something pure. Inside the small wooden cabin, a stillness lingered, the kind that comes after storms have passed, but before life dares to move on. Ethan Cole sat at the edge of the table, staring at the manila envelope that lay before him. Inside was the DNA report, the document that could change everything. Sarah Collins stood nearby, her auburn hair tied back, her face drawn but calm. She had seen enough truth in her life to know that truth often hurt. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You're sure?" he asked, voice low, roughened by sleepless nights. Sarah nodded. "There's no doubt. The tests came back conclusive. Noah is Robert Harlow's biological son." Ethan exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Across the room, Noah, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, sat on the floor playing with Rex, who nuzzled him gently, his gray-flecked fur glinting in the light. The boy's laughter filled the cabin, a sound so innocent it made Ethan's chest ache. A knock came at the door. Sarah exchanged a glance with Ethan, then opened it. Standing there was Robert Harlow, tall and distinguished even beneath his heavy wool coat. His once sharp features had softened with age and sorrow, the silver in his hair catching the morning sun. His blue eyes were rimmed red, not from the cold, but from years of grief finally finding release. Behind him stood his driver, Thomas, a stout man in his 50s, dressed neatly in black, who stayed respectfully by the car. For a moment, Robert said nothing. His gaze locked on Noah, the boy with blonde hair and sky-colored eyes, the reflection of his late youth. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. "He looks just like Evelyn did, when she was young." Ethan rose slowly. The two men stood face to face, one worn by wealth and regret, the other by labor and quiet endurance. "You must be Ethan," Robert said, extending a hand. "I owe you more than I could ever repay." Ethan hesitated, then shook it firmly. "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "I didn't do this for you." Robert's eyes softened. "No, but you did it for him," he said, glancing toward Noah. The boy had stopped playing, watching the stranger with shy curiosity. When Robert knelt, Noah instinctively moved closer to Rex, his small hand clutching the dog's fur. Ethan crouched beside him. "It's okay, buddy," he said gently. "This man came a long way to see you." Robert smiled faintly, tears glimmering. "Hello, Noah," he whispered. "You've grown so strong." He reached out slowly, but when Noah pulled back, hiding behind Ethan's arm, the billionaire's hand faltered in midair. The rejection stung, but not unexpectedly. How could a child recognize a father he'd never known? Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady but kind. "He'll need time," she said. "He's safe here. He's happy." Robert nodded. "I can see that." He looked around the cabin, the hand-carved furniture, the drawings on the walls, the warmth that no mansion could buy. He turned back to Ethan. "You've given him something I couldn't. Peace." Later that afternoon, the four of them sat together by the fire. Robert shared memories of the past, of Evelyn, who had died a year after their separation, of the son who had grown distant, of the empire that had felt increasingly hollow. "Money builds walls," he said quietly. "You start thinking they'll keep you safe, but all they do is keep love out." Ethan listened in silence, understanding in ways Robert couldn't imagine. A few days later, Robert invited Ethan and Noah to visit Harlow Estate, a vast property in upstate New York. When they arrived, the contrast was staggering. The sprawling mansion of marble and glass stood like a monument to everything Ethan had never wanted. Servants in crisp uniforms greeted them, their polite smiles unable to hide curiosity about the rugged man and the child by his side. Noah, dressed in a simple sweater, clung to Rex's fur, eyes wide at the sight of fountains and gardens stretching endlessly. Inside, Robert led them to a private wing where family portraits lined the walls. He stopped before one, a painting of Evelyn holding two infants. "This was commissioned before," he trailed off, emotion thickening his voice, "before everything changed." Ethan looked at the painting, then at the man beside him, and for the first time saw not a billionaire, but a father lost in the wreckage of his own choices. That evening, Robert made his offer. "You and Noah belong here," he said. "You'll have everything: education, security, a future. Let me make things right." Ethan shook his head gently. "I appreciate it, but Noah doesn't need marble walls or servants. He needs stability and love. I can't give him your fortune, but I can give him a home that's real." Robert was silent for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Then I'll help you protect that home," he said. "Not as a debt, as a friend." Weeks later, back in Montana, the snow had begun to melt, revealing the first hints of spring. The morning sun stretched over the valley, gilding the frost-covered fields. Noah rode on Rex's back, laughing as they ran through the meadow. Ethan stood beside Robert, both men watching in silence. The dog barked happily, his tail slicing through the air like a flag of victory. Robert spoke softly. "You were right. Blood connects us. But love is what keeps us alive." Ethan smiled faintly. "And sometimes, love comes from the people fate chooses, not the ones we expect." As the wind swept across the open field, it carried with it the echoes of both men's losses and their shared redemption. The world, for once, felt whole again. Sometimes, the greatest miracles do not come through thunder or lightning. They come quietly, through ordinary people who choose to love when it's hardest. Ethan wasn't a rich man, nor a saint. He was a man broken by war, living in silence until one stormy night, God placed a newborn child in his arms. That was no coincidence. That was grace. God's miracles often hide in the moments we least expect, in the stranger who stops to help, in the friend who forgives, in the child who teaches us how to believe again. Just like Ethan, maybe we're all carrying a storm inside us, waiting for the moment when light finally breaks through. If you believe that love is the language of God, and that every act of kindness creates a ripple of hope, then don't let this story end here. Share this video so others may see that miracles still happen in the quiet corners of our world. Comment Amen if you believe God still works through ordinary hearts. Subscribe to this channel to help spread stories of faith, love, and second chances. May the Lord bless you and protect your family. May He remind you, even in your darkest storms, that He is still writing your story and miracles are never out of reach.